Right. Good morning, everybody. So it's about 2 minutes before we start. So I think we just wait maybe a couple more minutes to allow some more people to join. And then I guess I'll get started. Okay, so it's 10 o'clock. And so I'll probably get started now. Welcome, everyone. So my name is Hassan Akil Khan. And this is a talk that I've been thinking about holding for quite some time. So before I start, can someone please quickly give me a sound check? Can you guys hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir, your voice is clear.
All right,
Yes.
perfect. Thank you so much for that feedback. Okay. So right. So the way that I designed this talk, what I'll do is I've divided it into two sections, and what I'm trying to do is to make it interactive, because this is something that I feel, you are here only if you're really interested in something like an academic career. So I want to kind of make it a little bit interactive. What I've done with my presentation is that I've tried to cover some of the major bases, some of the major things that I feel students don't know or kind of struggle with. That's more from an information perspective. So as long as you know those things, you know what to do, that's great. But it's also possible that every student's situation, I believe, is unique and different. And it is possible that there are some situations or some questions that you may have, or some scenarios that I may not have covered. So what I'd like to do maybe in the second half of this online webinar is to maybe ask you guys to ask some questions, and then hopefully we can address some of those questions. So some of the things that have not been covered in this task, we can then go through those and talk about those. And it is something that's maybe kind of unique to you. You can talk about that, and then I can probably give you some feedback on that. Okay. So let's get to it then. So my name is Hassan Akil Khan. I am I am currently a senior lecturer at Aston University. I'm also the CEO and co-founder of this company called AI Lounge. You can find us on the web at ai-lounge.com. We also have a Facebook page. It's called AI Batak. So you have the link here. And then I think probably because we are now getting more into professional things. I think the best thing, especially for you people, if you're into academics and research and all that stuff, probably follow our LinkedIn page, because that's also one of the areas where we're focusing on heavily. Okay, so about me, just as I said, since October of last year, I've been at Aston University in Birmingham in the UK as a senior lecturer in computer science. Since 2020, I've been part of AI Lounge, which is a startup that kind of came out of my work and collaboration with some of my colleagues while I was at NUST SEEKS in Islamabad. And then from 2020 to 2022, I was an assistant professor in computer science at the University of Jeddah in Saudi Arabia. And then 4 years before that, 2015 to 2019, after my PhD, I served as an assistant professor at NUST SEEKS Islamabad. And then 5 years, 4.5, 5 years before that, I was working as a graduate research assistant doing my PhD at Michigan State University in the US. And again, 3 years before my PhD, or 2 years before my PhD, I worked as a lecturer after my MSc, which was from the UK. And I was working as a lecturer at NUST SEEKS in Islamabad. And yes, I have some industry experience. I used to work in the telecom sector as well, but most of my career has now been spent in academics. So I'm kind of an old timer. So yeah, right. So let's move on. And I kind of wanted to share some of these things. Now, these are some of the success stories of our students that have had, I've had the pleasure of kind of collaborating with and working with, mostly during my time at NUST, and even after NUST, I kind of continue to stay in touch with those students, especially during COVID when I was in Saudi Arabia. I was mentoring some of them. And you can see that, a lot of them are now doing really well. Most of them, in fact, are either doing some sort of master's programs on scholarships, either from programs like Fulbright or the Erasmus program. And then obviously some of them also are doing fully funded PhDs, either in the US or in the EU. Some of them are in Japan, but at least one student I know is in Japan. Again, this is not an exhaustive list, but it kind of gives you an idea of, where other people are at, and some of our students are. And this is something that I feel whenever somebody asks me, what are you most proud of in your academic career so far? What has been your biggest achievement? For me, as someone who kind of got into academics for the passion of teaching, for the passion of research, with the kind of aim to be able to try to kind of at least make some sort of a difference in this Pakistan, this is something that I'm most proud of. The fact that students who I have mentored in some capacity, and obviously all of them were very outstanding individuals themselves, are people, to see them kind of do so well is something that I feel is my biggest achievement so far. Some of these people have been involved in some capacity as teaching assistants with AI Lounge as well. But yeah, that's what we're doing so far. Okay, so that's a little bit about what we've done. And what I'll talk about is, obviously, this is a research career. So the first thing that I'm going to kind of highlight is, if you're thinking about going into an academic career, the first question that you need to ask for yourself is this something that is for you? I mean, are you really into research? And make sure that when you're kind of going into a research career, you go in with an understanding of what that entails, right? Because if you pick a research career and that's something that you don't enjoy, then as with any career, I mean, it becomes a little bit of a pain, right? So what does a research career require? The first thing, obviously, is autonomy. So you need to quickly acquire new skills, acquire information from diverse sources, and things like that. And then the next thing that I also feel is the hardest part of being of being in an academic career or choosing a research career is to have some sort of self-discipline, in the sense that you have to set your own targets and goals and deadlines, and you have to achieve them on your own. There's nobody setting those targets for you, right? Obviously, if you are somebody who is a PhD student, if you are somebody who is maybe a postdoc or maybe an academic professor or an assistant professor, until you get to that very senior stage where you become a full professor, you'll always obviously have somebody chasing you. You'll always have your university or your supervisor or someone who is kind of pushing you to progress in your research. But unlike with conventional academics, unlike with conventional coursework or with other industry jobs, people are not kind of setting out the goals for you. You have to set them out yourself. So it's like a double-edged sword. You have a lot of flexibility in terms of what you do. You have freedom in what you do, but then you are eventually going to be held accountable for those. And to kind of set those goals for you. So if there's a deadline, I'll give you an example. If there's a deadline that, okay, Mr. So-and-so, you are a professor at some place, you're a teacher or university. Okay, these sort of, you need to check these many exams by so-and-so date. That's something that's kind of given to you as a hard deadline by someone else, and that's something that you generally have to kind of meet. But if it's something like, okay, I need to submit some sort of a research paper somewhere, I need to target some sort of funding grant, there's nobody who's kind of set that deadline for you. You have to kind of go in and do that yourself, right? And then the difficult part is kind of keeping yourself motivated to actually constantly keep setting those deadlines for yourself, and then also trying to meet them as well. Okay, so that's, I feel, for a lot of people, the hardest part of an academic research career. Okay, what happened here? Looks like, right, okay, sorry. Right, the next part obviously is curiosity. So people who don't question generally don't enjoy research. The reason I kind of moved from the industry to academics was that when I kind of went into the industry, and I was in the industry for about 2-3 years early on after my bachelor's degree, was that I didn't really feel very intellectually stimulated. I felt that I was doing routine things, the same things again and again, that the things that I felt that, didn't really challenge me to kind of, use the skills that I had acquired in my even in my bachelor's degree, right? So I didn't really enjoy that. And that's one of the reasons why I kind of, eventually ended up going into academic teaching and research, right? So, but, not all people are like that. So if you're not like that, if you're fine with doing the routine stuff, you're not to worry about being too creative or learning new things, then do something else, right? The other thing obviously is perseverance. You have to keep trying. You have to get used to rejections. People will reject your papers. People will criticize your work. And that's something that's just part of the game. So you have to kind of eventually develop this thick skin that, okay, well, I don't care. I'm going to still keep doing what I like doing, right? Multitasking, of course, is something. So it's not just about teaching and research. There are lots of management stuff that you have to do. And so that's something you have to manage, at least a small team of researchers. Then you have to apply for funding grants, and you have to talk to people, and it's about your networking and all that. So it's also involves a lot of multitasking as well. And then, of course, you require good communication skills as well, right? And good communication skills is not just about good spoken English, as I feel most students kind of think that, okay, I'll just speak good English and that's it. No, good communication skills is the ability, I feel, to kind of put your ideas down on paper, to describe them visually, to make it easy for someone else to understand, right? So if you're working on something that's very niche, that's very new, that's, at the cutting edge of things, you need to have very good writing and communication skills in order to kind of, make sure that people who review your work, people who read your work are able to understand it, right? And it's not very easy, especially if you're working in some area which is heavy on math or heavy on a lot of technical kind of aspects, right? So that's something that's also very important. Okay, there's obviously something that I need to emphasize. There's a strong ethical, you need to have a very strong ethical code, right? You'll find within research, and that's something that I feel is common in some places than in others, but you need to make sure that you hold yourself to a very high ethical standard. So the results that you're putting in your papers, they need to be genuine. The experiments that you are doing, they need to be genuine. And there will, everybody kind of gets to a point where, you feel that, okay, even if I just change this number a little bit, nobody will know. But again, you're doing research for the passion of research, and you need to make sure that even though, don't get into this rat race of having the most amount of papers or the highest numbers in terms of, the results are the very best and all that. No, it's more about reporting and transparently and fairly reporting what you've done, right? So it's important that you have that. Okay, so yeah, so if you kind of checked all these boxes, then yeah, maybe this is something that you might want to get into. Or if you're thinking about doing some sort of an internship, trying to explore research, these are the sort of questions that you would kind of come across, and these are the questions that you might want to ask yourself. So, see if you actually, so it's, everybody will say that I like these things, yes, I check all these boxes, but maybe put yourself out there for a bit, experience, maybe apply for a short research internship somewhere, experience these things yourself, and then you see, maybe 6 months later, how do you feel about them, right? Do you actually enjoy doing this sort of stuff? And whether it's for you, right? Whether it's actually your cup of tea. All right, so what are some of the career paths? That's something that I want to discuss. So yeah, so your career path obviously typically will start with something like grad school, right? So that's, if you want to get into research, you need to have at least a master's degree. In most cases, maybe a PhD degree, right? So that's where you start off with. But you don't have to go into university. There are a lot of people who actually go into the industry as well. And then within the industry, let's say after your PhD, you say, okay, well, I've done enough research and I don't want to do any more. Well, you could go into development roles as well. And you will find positions that, like people who have those kind of research skills, but then they don't have to, do the sort of research that you would normally do, because you're kind of constantly writing papers and things like that. So you'll still you can transition to a development career even after your PhD, right? But then even within the industry, you will find that there are a lot of companies who are actually doing research, and they will actually be looking for people to do their research. The type of research that you do would then be slightly different. So instead of publishing academic papers, you'd be looking more into, getting patents and building intellectual property for your employer. So it's similar, but obviously it's different from the way that academic research is done. Right. The other part obviously is academia, right? And academia is, you basically apply for a faculty position at some university. And then even within academia, you will also have pure teaching positions. Let's say you want to kind of just teach and you enjoy teaching, and you say, okay, I've done my PhD, but then I don't want to do any research. In the future, you will find universities that are purely focused on teaching, but they still require somebody who is hired as a faculty member to at least have a PhD degree, right? So, but these kind of roles, people are not really expected to do any kind of research, right? And then there are pure research positions as well. So you will find universities or research centers that are focused purely on research, and in those cases, people won't be doing any research. Won't be doing any teaching. They'll just be doing research, right? And then the most common stream, obviously, is what is called the teaching plus research track, where you could say 40 to 50% of your of your time is taken up by teaching, and then the remaining 50 to 60% is taken up by research. So that's something that I'm doing at Aston. So right now, I'm on a what's called a 60-40 contract, right? So 60% of my time goes into research, in fact, and then the 40%, 60% is teaching, and then 40% is for research, right? But these things can vary. But yes, most academic positions would be a mix of teaching and research, and you have to kind of maintain this balance between your teaching and your research, right? So you can't just spend your entire time teaching and then not do any research, or just completely ignore teaching and just do research all the time. Again, you have to kind of reach this balance between the two. Okay. Right. So how do you get into grad school, right? So if you're going into a research career, the first kind of step that you need to take is to get into grad school. So you need to get somewhere, regardless of what your destination is, but you need to kind of, do something like a PhD degree, or at least a master's degree, right? So how do you do that? And a lot of these things you probably know already. So the requirements are things like language tests, so IELTS, TOEFL, things like that. If you're thinking about going to the US, you'll probably have something like your GREs or graduate record exams. You need to have a good GPA. You don't need to have like a stellar GPA. If you do, that's great. But again, if even with an above average GPA, you could still get into lots of programs. And it's not the only factor, right? Because yes, you need to have a decent GPA, but then you also need to have a lot of other things as well, especially if you're looking to get some sort of funding to fund your for your studies, right? The other thing you need to have is a good admission application. So you need to kind of tell or convince the admission committee why you're interested in or why you should be given admission, and then hopefully funding as well, right? You need to have good academic references, and I'll talk about each of these in more detail later on in my talk, right? Preferable but not mandatory. If you're looking for something like PhD funding for your PhD, then it would be great if you have some sort of at least one research publication, maybe like a conference paper that can showcase what you've done, right? It's not something that is absolutely necessary, but it's helpful to have that. But I've had students who, for whatever reason, did have good research credentials, but were not able to publish for some reason. But we're still, able to get funding for master's studies or PhD studies because they could, their reference was able to show. I think just recently, one of my former students has been accepted into a program somewhere in the EU, and he, when he was working with me, his health kind of declined, and he was not really able to, publish during the project or from the project that he was kind of doing with me. But that was something that I highlighted in his reference. And I think the admission committee kind of took that into account. And he was able to, I think just a couple of weeks ago, he was able to kind of secure a very good offer, I think somewhere in Germany, right? Right. So what makes an applicant stand out, right? So pretty much everyone. So everyone who applies will check all these boxes, right? But wait, what makes you stand out? What makes you stand out from the hundreds of applications or the thousands of other applications if it's a big university that it's receiving, right? So what makes an applicant stand out? Well, there are a number of things. So everybody would have done their language tests, everybody would have done their GREs, they would have a decent GPA. But what's going to make you stand out is a great admission application. So why do you want to apply to that program? Why do you feel you're a suitable candidate for that program? Why you're a good fit? So you have to sell yourself a little bit. You also need to have strong academic references. So not just any academic reference. So, not something that you've written and somebody in the faculty has signed off on it. It needs to be something that actually really makes the case for you, right? And I'll give you at least one example of a strong academic reference for a student who actually was able to then get a scholarship. So I'll show that in a few slides, right? The next thing, obviously, yes, if you can have relevant research experience, which, if you're applying to some program and the thought of research that they do is completely unrelated to what you've been doing, then the chances of you getting it are going to be low, right? And then obviously you need to have some sort of extracurricular stuff to kind of demonstrate maybe leadership. And these are the things that you also can include. Obviously, universities are looking for well-rounded individuals. So they're not looking for people who are just going to be sitting in the labs for 10, 14 hours. They're hopefully, with PhD students, they're looking for people who can then, after they graduate, can become good representatives of the university as alumni. So if they're going into the industry, they want them to be successful. If they're going into research, they want them to turn into successful academics later on and kind of become good ambassadors for the university. And this is especially true for universities that get a lot of applications. So the top ranked universities obviously will be looking at these things as well. And then there's one thing that can really help you is your research network, right? And so what is your research network? Well, people who you've done research with in the past or who know you and are kind of into research. Again, maybe your academic supervisor, your project supervisor, somebody who is familiar with what you can do, what you've been doing, or somebody who's connected to your academic supervisor. So I'll talk about the research network and how to kind of build your research network. And again, these are some of the things that a lot of students are actually not aware of, but I feel it's very important that they are, because, if you can leverage your network to kind of, push for you, or if you can leverage your network to kind of, get connected to some professor at some university, you're able to get introduced to them through a personal link, somebody who knows them, somebody who's kind of willing to vouch for you, then the chances are that you will get that funding, right? So don't underestimate the power of having a good network. And I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail later on. So what is a strong reference? Strong reference basically attests the characteristics highlighted in your application. So whatever you've written down in your essay, it kind of needs to be in sync with that. It's not something that, so if you've written down in your application, I've done so-and-so project and I've built so-and-so things, and then your references don't mention that at all, they're just completely generic, then the admission committee is going to kind of doubt what you've written, right? They need some sort of evidence, and that evidence generally comes from the reference, okay? It talks about your research skills. Yes, obviously, because if you're looking for research funding, then yes, your references kind of need to introduce those. And so that's why ideally, there should be someone who has some idea, ideally from your research advisor, somebody that you've done research with, or somebody who has somewhat of an idea of what research you've been doing, okay? Because otherwise they won't be able to really put those details down. And obviously it seems genuine, right? If it's a very generic reference that says, oh, you're an excellent candidate, great, but they're receiving maybe 500 other applications where again the references say, oh, this is the best student that we have, right? So it needs to seem genuine. You need to give so how would it seem genuine? Well, first of all, it needs to come from someone who you have genuinely worked with. And then you also need to give them a little bit of time to work on your reference, right? So if you give your research advisor maybe 2 days to work on your reference, then obviously that's something, the reference won't come out very strong, because, I know that students think that professors don't have a lot on their plate, but we generally are kind of juggling a lot of things that you are not aware of. And so it's important that you give your referees sufficient time. I think at least 2 weeks to kind of work and develop your reference. Okay. And ideally should be from someone who is active in research themselves, right? So if you get a reference, a strong reference from somebody who also has a good, strong research track record, first of all, they'll be able to write you a good reference because they know what those universities and programs are looking for. And then second of all, if they're active in research, if they are working in certain areas, chances are that people might know them or their research, and that obviously will increase your chances of getting not only admission. Most people who apply from good schools do get an admission offer. What you want to do is not only get an admission offer, but you also want to get funding for your research, right? And for that, you need to make a very strong case. Okay, so now I'll show you an example of a good reference. And so you guys may want to read it, but I'll kind of write. So this is for a former student of mine who was at NUST. I've kind of blanked out the name and identification details because I didn't have enough time to kind of ask his permission. But this is basically what I wrote. So this is a reference that I wrote for one of my students. And this is the first part, and then I'll show you the second part on the next slide. So, I wrote, okay, yeah, I'm pleased to write this recommendation letter for Mr. So-and-so, who started working under my supervision in May 2018. So I'm writing this reference in 2021. So this is 3 years after that student started working with me, right? So this reference letter kind of summarizes that 3-year relationship or interaction that I've had with the student. We obviously did not spend that entire 3 years working on that project. He worked with me for about a year and a half, and then graduated and was working in the industry. But obviously we did keep in touch, right? So I was aware of what he was doing and where in the industry he was working, right? So when he first applied to do a summer internship in my research lab at NUST SEEKS, and he demonstrated a great deal of commitment and motivation. Yes, that's standard stuff that will be there. But one thing that I did highlight was the fact that, he kind of sacrificed his whole summer for an unpaid internship, right? So the referee is kind of saying that this guy is kind of motivated and committed to doing research, because rather than spending your summer partying, you're actually spending that summer doing that internship. And then again, if there are any people here who are kind of doing some sort of summer internship, I know people at NUST run those programs. Maybe if you're from some other university, if you're doing those kind of internships, these are the sort of things that eventually will kind of benefit you later on, okay? And so during his internship, he went through the basics of AI and deep learning, mostly via online courses on Coursera. These covered, so I'm just kind of saying that, okay, he knows the basics, he covered the material. Obviously, it was quite challenging for second-year undergrad students, but he was able to make up for it. And then later on, I mentioned that, yes, he did kind of take in spring 2019, he took my machine learning elective. His overall score was the second highest in class. Again, you don't have to, you don't have to be exactly like this. This was a very outstanding student. But, if you can check some of these boxes, that would be great, right? Even if you're in the top 20%, that's still something that, given that at NUST or other universities, other public sector universities as well, I'm not sure whether there are students from other universities too, but if we get students from other universities, again, the programs are very competitive, and I generally write that down. So even if I have a student who's in the top 20%, I do kind of highlight that, yes, he's in the top 20% or even the top 30%, but, our program is the best in the country. So, it's not a small achievement to be in the top 15, 20%, okay? So this is just a little bit about so this is generic stuff, right? This would kind of go into any student who's done a little bit of research with me, but and maybe done some sort of an internship, taken a course with some professor. That's still good, but then there's other aspects to it that kind of now highlights the sort of research that the student did, right? And I'm kind of saying that, we started working on your final year project in February 29. The objective of this project was to apply deep learning for so-and-so things. And so this student and his teammates were so dedicated to the project that, again, they spent the entire summer working on it. Their work resulted in the publication of a manuscript in a certain journal. I will name the paper, right? this was the first. Now, this is something that I've highlighted. Again, it kind of shows that relationship, it kind of provides evidence, right? It does not have to be for every student, but if it is there, I definitely put in there, right? So this was the first journal manuscript that I published with undergraduate students, and the student was instrumental in making this research a success, right? So that's something that I've highlighted. There are very, very few undergraduate students who are able to publish a journal manuscript, and that's something that obviously deserves to be highlighted, right? So I'm kind of obviously I'm very happy with his research performance. Few students are able to do this. Yeah, and then I've also written that, universities are often asked, do they have good written oral communication skills? I obviously highlight that his skills are excellent. He's very clear-headed about what he wants. He's a good planner. And I think he's far ahead of his peer group in terms of planning for graduate school applications, right? And then obviously you have to write some negative as well, because if as a referee you write all positive, if you're all praises and you don't write any negative, then the admission committee is sometimes also a little bit skeptical about what you're writing. So also kind of sometimes would write. On the flip side, he does need convincing sometimes when he is kind of assigned new tasks and stuff, right? So that's something that I've written down. Okay. But one thing that I've highlighted, of course, is, so this was a Fulbright application. And I've said of all the students that I have recommended so far for the Fulbright program, I believe that this student is the most suitable, right? And this is something which is a very big thing to write. I would not write that for any other student. There's only one student that I did write this for, but obviously he was somebody who did do exceptionally well, in the kind of research interaction that I did have with him. Okay, but it's kind of what I'm kind of showing you is, it kind of speaks for itself. So it's kind of telling the readers, it's building an interesting story. It's telling, the scholarship committee that, okay, this student has done so and so many things. And this is, this student was eventually able to get the Fulbright program. He's now in the US doing his Fulbright thing. One of the other things that I kind of want to highlight is whenever you're applying for a scholarship program like Fulbright or maybe the Commonwealth, make sure that you are clear about what their themes are, right? What sort of people is the Fulbright program looking for, right? And the Fulbright program, I think one of their main themes is to kind of fund people who will eventually come back to Pakistan, right? Not people who they'll fund and will go to the US and then never come back. They're ideally looking for people who are able to demonstrate in their application that I want to do this study and then I have so-and-so plan to come back and contribute to Pakistan, right? Now, if you don't see yourself doing that, if you want to immigrate and move to some other country, then, you may not want to apply to Fulbright. Or even if you do apply to Fulbright and then you don't have program, you're not really serious about coming back, these kind of scholarship committees, people who make these decisions generally are very smart people, right? They've been doing this for many, many years. Chances are that they will figure it out. Okay, so keep that in mind. Okay, right. So there's this example. I hope that this was useful. It gives you some sort of an idea. But yes, that's an example of one reference. Yeah, so what makes a strong reference? Evidence of genuine hard work. Give your referee sufficient time, minimum 2 weeks to work on it. Don't send this email, dear Dr. Hassan, can you submit a reference for me within 2 days? And then the next line is, I'm kind of reading between the lines. It's kind of you're implying that I know you don't have much on your plate right now, which is not true. And, people are generally very busy, especially if you're talking about professors. So that's something that you need to keep in mind. All right, so how to gain your research experience? Find a good research mentor, find somebody in your university, somebody that's physically close to you, someone who has active research collaboration, somebody who does research in areas that you're interested in, areas that you're genuinely interested in. Again, research is something that you should be passionate about. So don't go for an area that, just everybody is going for. You should genuinely enjoy doing working in that particular area. Okay. Use your final year project or your MS thesis as good learning platforms. So yes, if you can do final year projects or master's thesis that are kind of research focused, then that gives you a little bit of that experience. It allows you to, first of all, evaluate whether this is really your cup of tea, right? Whether you're actually made for research or not. And so that's something that you probably want to consider. So if you kind of do something that is more on the lines of research, that gives you that experience, it gives you the ability to kind of do that sort of self-analysis, right? Am I made for this? Is this something that I should be doing for the next many years, right? Ideally. Okay, and invest your time wisely. So again, if you can sacrifice a couple of summers, if you can put yourself through a little bit of extra pain, push yourself a little bit. Yes, summer is the time that you will have to do this because, you're not really pushed by your coursework or any other things like that. Then yes, and it's not easy to do because most people in your peer group will not be doing the same thing, right? But if you invest that time wisely, then chances are that you will get good returns at the end of the day. Okay. Right. The next thing that's kind of important is how to build your research network, right? Because again, if you're applying to a very competitive program, chances are that they're getting hundreds of applications or even thousands of applications. How do you stand out? Or let's say you're applying to some university in the US. If through your network, you're able to develop a professional relationship with some professor, if your research advisor is able to introduce you to some people, chances are that you will get that funding, right? So, but then how do you build that network, right? So I'll give you an example. Start close to home. Again, start working with people who are active in research. Again, so let's say if, I'm looking for PhD candidates all the time. Whenever I get funding, I would want to hire people later on, but then where do I start? I'm not, yes, I will look at people. I will there will be a competitive application process, and yes, but then if I receive an application from some professor that I know at NUST, like for example, I know Dr. Wajahat. Dr. Wajahat writes a very strong reference for a student. The fact that he is able to write a very strong reference is, obviously going to increase my confidence in hiring that student, right? So that's where your network is really important, right? So start with someone who is kind of close to you at your university, or let's say if you're at a university where you have people who are not really very active in research, maybe find somebody at another university, right? That maybe can give you a little bit of time and can mentor you. Okay. One way to build your network is to explore online research networks. So look at things like Google Scholar, look at LinkedIn, ResearchGate. Try to find people who are connected to people at universities that are looking to hire PhD students, right? So here's an example. So if you go to my Google Scholar, so if you look at my Scholar profile, you'll see, okay, you'll see a list of my papers and their citations. You'll see my current affiliation. You'll probably find my home page. And then, somewhere on that page, you'll also find a list of my co-authors. So if you look at the first co-author, Wajahat, he is a former student who is now in Canada. Now, how could you leverage this network? So let's say you worked with me. I could introduce you to Wajahat, or let's say you could just look at Wajahat's profile, see somebody who's an alumni from your school. So let's say if he's an alumni of SEEKS, you as a SEEKS student might kind of approach Wajahat, send him an email and say, okay, hey, I'm a student at your university and I'm looking for PhD fundings. Are you aware of any fundings that, or any professors who might actually be looking for students within your university? right? And as an alumni from your school, he would be kind of inclined to help you, right? I'm not guaranteeing that he would, but there are chances that he would actually be willing to help you out, right? So in that case, you're kind of finding that common ground, and you're kind of, approaching a person at a university who can kind of give you access to information. So he might tell, okay, well, there are these professors. I know this professor at my school is looking for somebody in this area. He might actually be able to, connect you to that professor, right? So those are the sort of things that you could do, right? Or, let's say you want to apply to some university in the US, and you are somebody who's done, research with me or some other professor at NUST, and you go and look at, okay, what sort of professors who I collaborate with. You go into that list and you see what professors. Let's say you want to go to the UK. You may find some of my collaborators in the UK, and then maybe ask me, okay, is there anybody in the UK who might have funding or looking for people, so that's how you kind of leverage your network. Or maybe if you're looking for some people in the US, generally as an academic, if you are a student who has a good track record, has, done some research with me, or for any academic, we as academics are generally very helpful, and we are more than happy to connect you to the right people. But at the end of the day, then obviously your case has to speak for itself. So if you make a good case, if you are able to actually demonstrate that you've done good research, then obviously you will get admitted. But again, so first of all, I personally would not connect you to anybody if I'm not confident about your abilities, or any student's abilities, to actually kind of go in and hold their own or be able to successfully complete their PhD somewhere, right? But if I'm reasonably confident, then yes, I would be more than happy, or any student who's looking for opportunities, right? That's something that we as academics kind of always are more than happy to do, is to help out students, right? That's one of the reasons why a lot of us are academics, is to be able to kind of help students out, okay? All right, so this gives you an example of how to build your research network. I'm going to kind of close, I have a few more slides, and then I'll stop the slide part. And then what I'd like you to do is to maybe turn your cameras on, or maybe we can open questions, and then you guys can then ask your questions, whatever they may be, okay? So yes, how do you build your network? So yes, that's what I was talking about. Next part is, find and reach out to people who are willing to help, right? You will find people on LinkedIn, on social media, who generally are willing to help, right? So there are professors who, for whatever reasons, like to, hire students from developing countries, and you could actually, it's not very difficult to find them. You could actually, and you could find them on LinkedIn. There are people who also like to share positions when they are available. So if you start following them on LinkedIn, you might actually, so even though you may not be a network connection to those people, even though, so you're not on a first kind of link basis connected to them, but if you're following them on LinkedIn and they share a certain PhD position or a certain research position, you might actually come across that, or even a postdoc position, if you have if we have somebody here who's already a PhD student, right? So you might actually find those things helpful. So yes, follow people who are known for kind of sharing this sort of information, and maybe follow them on LinkedIn or whatever socials they use more frequently. But I think for a professional network, LinkedIn tends to be the best. Okay. The other thing you want to do, obviously, is to showcase your skill as well. If you're a computer scientist or somebody more into software or electrical engineering, does a little bit of coding, maybe build a GitHub repo to showcase your project. Your research articles obviously exhibit your ideas. They also exhibit your experience, research experience, and writing skills. Another thing that you could do is maybe contribute to tutorials. So maybe build tutorials for Kaggle if you're in data science and machine learning. or, there might be other similar platforms. Even something like a 5-minute YouTube video recording is something that's a good way to kind of showcase your skills. Because again, one of the important factors that universities often look for when they're hiring researchers is the ability to teach as well, right? So if you, as a PhD student, can do some sort of a teaching assistantship, you need to be able to teach, right? So if you can demonstrate that, that's something that obviously will be considered a positive trait, right? And then one more thing you could do, obviously, so because again, it's not just about research experience, you want to have some sort of teaching experience as well. Maybe something like a TA position or experience of a teaching assistantship is also something that would probably look good on your resume and on your references, okay? Right, how to identify the right schools. Again, one thing that's important, target schools with a track record of accepting alumni from your university, right? If you apply to some very top-ranked university which has no history of recruiting people from your university, chances are that nobody on the hiring committee knows your university. I know that with universities like NUST, they are now fairly well known. So chances of that are low, but then again, there are still places in the world that don't really know a lot of universities from Pakistan. So if you're applying to universities which has a track record of recruiting students from your school, you can be confident of your chances. And the reason is that once they've recruited people from your university and they've kind of then actually realized how good the students from your university are, then they're more kind of willing to hire students from those universities, right? So yes, target schools that your seniors have gone into, and chances are that you will get in there. Okay, target scholarships like Fulbright, Commonwealth, but make sure that your theme or that your profile matches what those guys are looking for. So if you apply for a scholarship that it does not really match what your career aims are, chances are that you, even though you may have a very outstanding profile, chances are that you will not get accepted. Okay, again, how do you find what their themes are? Maybe read their ads a little bit more carefully, maybe talk to their alumni, look at the profile of their alumni, and also talk to professors who've been recommending students into those programs, and they'll give you a better idea of what these guys generally look for. Okay, and again, scholarships are not always looking for students with the best research and teaching records. Yes, they are, and those are important factors, but then let's say for Fulbright, one of the most important factors is that they need to be sure that you will come back to Pakistan after you graduate. All right, they need to kind of see this aspect. Okay, what's your plan after you kind of graduated? What are you going to do? How are you going to contribute to your own country, right? That's just one thing that's very important to them, and that's one of the reasons why they generally tend to prefer people who are, again, I'm not speaking for them, so let me not go down that line, but yes, that's an important factor, right? Another factor that you want to consider whenever you're thinking about going anywhere is culture and diversity. You're going to fit in there. Does that the city that you're planning on moving to, is it a vibrant country? Is it opening, vibrant city? Is it welcoming to diverse people from different ethnic backgrounds? If going to a place like that, that might actually be very useful. I mean, again, I am currently living in Birmingham, and I really like living in Birmingham for the fact that Birmingham is a very diverse, multicultural, multi-ethnic city, right? And that's one of the pull factors that actually kind of pulled me towards this city in particular. Okay, you also want to look at job prospects after graduation, cost of living, and things like that. Again, it's up to you, but I'm kind of pointing as factors that will eventually become important. Okay, I think this is the final slide, or the second last slide. So what's your timeline, right? So your timeline to your graduate application. So you are, let's say, submitting your timeline, graduate application at time X, so a certain year. So let's say right now, then you need to start laying the groundwork for this maybe 2 years ahead or 2 years in the past, right? So that's where you start. So you start X minus 24 months or 2 years before you actually submit your graduate school application. X minus 20 months, maybe summer, identify and acquire skills that are needed. People who are at NUST right now, who are doing their research internship, I know maybe in Dr. Faisal's lab or maybe with Dr. Wajahat, they're probably on the right track, right? Next thing is maybe identify a target destination. What's the country that you want to head to? What are some of the schools that you want to apply to? And do a little bit of your research during that time. You're probably going to be doing it during your semester when you're kind of taking courses. So yes, you won't need too much time for this. So that's why maybe you don't have to do this in the summer. 12 months. So the next summer, so 1 year before you are kind of planning on submitting your graduate school application, strengthen your skills, use your FYP or your thesis. So start working on building a strong final year project or a thesis. So, build on what you've learned in the previous summer, right? And then 6 months before you submit, you might want to invest a little bit of time showcasing your skills, right? Maybe build a GitHub repo to showcase your project. Maybe submit that paper that you are looking to showcase with your application, right? And then 3 months before you are probably finally going to submit, 3-4 months, you can maybe start approaching people through your network, see if they have any positions, talk to them, and then see if your network can actually help you, right? So this is a rough kind of plan that you can use. Doesn't have to be, it's not written in stone. There's obviously room for flexibility in there. Let's say you've already graduated. Well, if you've already graduated, maybe you now have more time than you did maybe as an undergraduate student. Maybe you can shrink this timeline down to 1 year and kind of, do these things during that 1 year. Excuse me, I just need to mute my mic for 1 second. Okay, so that's your timeline. And then, it might seem like a lot to do, right? So where do you start? A lot of you might be feeling overwhelmed. It feels like that there's a lot that needs to be done. I would like to encourage you to get started, even if you haven't started yet. Maybe you can start later and start with baby steps. Take small steps. Do these things one at a time. You don't have to do it in 2 years. You can do it maybe in 3 years. You can change the timeline. But as long as you kind of keep investing in yourself, as long as you keep investing in your profile and your skills, this is something that you want to do, you will eventually get it, right? If you are, again, as a researcher, if you have that perseverance, if you keep at it, then eventually you will get it, right? That's one of those things. So it doesn't matter whether you get any rejections, you could get 10 rejections, but maybe number 11 is something that will kind of happen, right? So that's it. Now, that's my last slide. I'm going to stop here. And what I'd like to do next is maybe open it up for questions. So anybody would like to ask questions, you can. If you've already added them in the chat, maybe I can quickly look into the chat and then see what questions people have. But I mean, I've left a little bit of time, so you're also welcome to raise your hand. And then we can kind of, answer your questions as well. Right. So Eamon, have we noted down any relevant questions in the chat?
हमारे पास सारे questions हैं वो chat में सबने post कर दिए.
Okay. So let me see. So let me start. how much GPA is good enough for masters or research and such? That's not an easy question to answer. I think it does not have to be a stellar GPA. And the trick with GPA is that it kind of varies from university to university. But as long as your GPA kind of relates to something which is average or above average, then you should be fine. So, again, depends on what you're looking to do. But if you're trying to get something like a funded position, then maybe something like 3.0, 3.25 CGPA should be enough to get you there. But again, if your GPA is a little bit low, you can always make up for it by investing in your research track record, right? The student that I kind of showed you the reference for, I remember that's an interesting story. So he applied to one research group for a summer internship. He wasn't able to get it. So he then came to me and he said, well, I couldn't get into that other lab. Would you be willing to give me a chance? And I said, okay, why not? I mean, I'd be happy to have you. And you didn't have, you had a decent GPA, probably somewhere around 3.5. But what he was really good at, and this is something that I kind of highlighted in the reference as well, what he was really good at was kind of doing things. So if I told him, go and do this, he would, he was very independent in what he did, and he was very motivated about what he was doing, right? So I gave him a chance, and he kind of grabbed it with both hands, and he really, really made very good progress. So the GPA wasn't like wasn't like a 4.0 GPA, but his other skills were outstanding. So you need to be like a well-rounded individual, right? So it's not just about GPA. Yes, you need a reasonable GPA. But again, if you're thinking about going into research, I'm assuming that you enjoy academics, right? So you need to have at least somewhere minimum GPA. Somewhere around three is, I think, is generally decent. But again, varies from place to place. Also, yeah. Okay. So how much GPA is good enough? Again, varies. Also, it varies from university to university. Some universities are a little bit more stringent about this. Some are, they don't really care that much. So you can always apply and find out. Again, one way of being confident about getting into a certain program is if you see people with similar profile as you getting into a program, then chances are that you might get in. Okay. Yeah, but there's no fixed kind of answer. Okay. If you don't have a publication, can you cover it by highlighting your research experience? Yeah. Again, I believe I've mentioned this, right? So I think Awais asked this question. So if you don't have a publication, can you cover it up by highlighting your research experience? You could to some extent, but again, your research needs, you need to have something, because publications take time, right? What you really need to have is you need to be able to demonstrate that you've done some research, right? And if you don't have a paper, but your referee kind of writes that, okay, he did this in this project, and for some reason his paper has not been published. The other thing you could do is, even if you don't have a paper that's peer reviewed, or let's say your paper is kind of under review at the moment, what you could do is maybe upload a paper or part of your writing to let's say to Kaggle, to archive, and use that. Excuse me, I'm getting a call, so just give me 1 second. Hello. All right, sorry. for the interruption. So yeah, so as long as you have at least some piece of writing, that would be that kind of allows the evaluators to get a little bit of an idea of what your writing ability is. So let's say even if it's not a research paper, but you have something like a Kaggle tutorial, you can put that in your resume, and people can kind of look at that, right? So that is something that you could do. Recently, many students have been using ChatGPT to write their cover letters. As a good practice to rephrase your cover letter using ChatGPT. I mean, I think if you use ChatGPT to write it, first of all, you're starting on the wrong. You're not really. I personally feel not really somebody who should be doing research rigors, because at the end of the day, it needs to be your own work. But I think even if anybody does write it using ChatGPT, I don't think it will be good enough to actually get you in, because ChatGPT might be able to write good English, right? But ChatGPT doesn't know who you as a person are. So Avas asked this question, right? So ChatGPT doesn't know what Avas is all about, right? It can write you a generic research statement, but I don't think it will appeal to people who are reading it, right? So because your research statement or your cover letter kind of is gelling together everything. It's gelling together 3 years or 2 years or however many years of work you've put in to kind of get to that stage where you're able to make a good application. And if that work is not there, if that evidence is not there, then heavy words or good English vocabulary won't get you in. Okay, I mean, it'll get you admission, but it won't get you funding, right? So yeah, that's what I feel. Okay, so hopefully that answers your question. Okay, I think you can still get into grad school even if you have like a 2.9 GPA or 3.2 GPA. I think you're fine. Well, I mean, one thing you could do is so you could obviously apply to top schools, but then the other thing is also apply to schools that are maybe less competitive, and you can still go to those schools, right? The other thing you could do is, diversify your existing research portfolio. And again, as a student, you might tend to think that research is something that's just for people who are the very top of their class. First of all, if you're sitting at a university like NUST, if you're sitting at a university like, maybe UET, Lahore or Texla, or, I'm not sure where people are from, but if you're sitting at one of the top schools within Pakistan, you are already, you'd be considered some of the best students in the country, first of all, right? So first of all, that itself is a huge achievement. So you can pat yourself on the back for that. Then, so yes, then what you can do is, as long as you have, proof or evidence to back up your skills. If you say, yes, I did these kind of things, I did this type of research, I worked on this project, then yes, your grades don't need to be stellar, right? And then at the end of the day, the universities are looking for well-rounded individuals, right? And then also you'll find places that, you don't, not all people that graduate from SEEKs are going to go into Stanford, right? Or are going to go into some of the top schools in the US. You'll find, or not, in fact, not all of them are going to go to the US. Some of them might come to the UK. And then even within the UK, you might not get into Oxford or Cambridge, but you could still, there are, hundreds of other universities that would still be more than happy to have you, right? So you could apply to other places. So yes, don't let the GPA worry you too much. Again, it's more about the skills. Do you check all those boxes? Look at those things. And it might be a good idea to actually compile a list of this. And unfortunately, I didn't have time to do this, but maybe look at all the skills that I've highlighted, make a table and do a little bit of a self-assessment, write that down. How much, how is, what kind of an FYP am I planning? Have I written any tutorials? And if you actually do that exercise, you might actually figure out that, you're, in a lot of cases, you might actually come to the realization that you're actually underestimating your abilities, okay? Or on the other things, you might kind of come to the realization that, okay, I've done these kind of things, and then these are the things, these are the variables or the features that I kind of need to build and strengthen, right? So you could kind of build on those, okay? So it really is more about how you plan your career versus just, not doing anything about it. So yes, academic part is important, but then I've shown you all these other things. So when I'm talking about my presentation, so let me go back to my presentation. So let me go back to, okay, sorry, let me just go back to that presentation. Look at this, right? You need to have a reasonable GPA as long as it's above a certain threshold, as long as you can demonstrate that you're an above average student. But then great admission application, strong academic references. Again, strong academic reference is not going to come just on its own. That's something, in order to make that academic reference strong, you need to actually have done something, right? And GPA is one aspect, but let's suppose you've done some research with some professor, you've demonstrated a strong commitment to that research. That's something that actually can go into your academic reference, and it can actually end up making it quite strong, right? I mean, again, people who are at NUST, I would encourage you to, either, do your final year project or your MS thesis, maybe with, people like Dr. Wajahat, maybe with Dr. Faisal. I know Faisal's lab is really competitive, and it's very hard to get into, but, there are lots of faculty members in there. There are new people in there as well, who you can actually collaborate with. I know, and again, I've been away from SEEKS for almost 4 years now. So, but I feel that at the time that I was there, there were some excellent academics there that you could actually work with, and, you could serve as your mentors to kind of help you build that profile, okay? So yeah, so it's not just GPA. So forget about, yes, GPA is one factor, but then there are like, a large number of other factors as well. Okay. Let me go to the next question. I want to apply for a PhD. Should I look for a scholarship or directly contact professors? I think a better idea would be to kind of reach out to professors. But again, a lot of professors, first of all, you need to find who those professors are, who are looking for students, who have funding. That information you can find out either by reaching out to the professors directly, but that can be a little difficult to do because a lot of professors do get a lot of emails, right? And it's very difficult for them to kind of answer all these emails of interest. But one good way, one good strategy of finding which professor at a certain university has funding is to talk to other students, maybe some of your seniors who've recently gone into some universities, maybe talk to them, and they can maybe introduce you to some, they can tell you, okay, this professor just got this funding, or this professor is looking for people. And then when I was at SEEKS, I would also often have people within my network reach out to me and then ask me, okay, we're looking for these, for a PhD student, we just got funding, can you recommend someone? And in those cases, I would generally often recommend the students who had been doing, who had been collaborating with me, who'd been working in my lab for the last year or so, right? People who had actually genuinely who'd actually demonstrated that then they were generally hardworking, reliable, responsible people. Okay, so you can approach professors directly. Again, you can build your network and try to reach out to them using that network. But again, first of all, identify what your area of interest is. Maybe even follow those professors, follow them on LinkedIn and see if they kind of keep sharing those things. If you're looking for positions in the UK, there's a portal called jobs.ac.uk. I think, not sure whether they post PhD positions, but there's another one, and I can maybe share that. There's another one in the UK that's kind of contains mostly PhD studentships, and I'll kind of share that with you as well. So over there, if you keep following those places, those portals, you'll actually keep getting updates about the PhD positions that are available. Okay. How can students build relationship with researchers and other professors, professionals in the tech industry? And what are some of the resources that they can use to learn about research opportunities in the industry? Again, if you're in the industry, you probably need to talk to some people in the industry. There's a concept in Pakistan, I think peer ka concept. So maybe find the peer, maybe find somebody in the industry that you're kind of looking to get into, and then try to kind of make them your mentor. So identify somebody that you want to become, and then make them your mentor or make them your peer, right? So learn from them. So reach out to them. Again, with the industry, because I'm not part of the industry, so I can't give you very clear advice on that. Probably more familiar with the way that academics work. But again, similar concept. Reach out to people. You have the right mentors. I think you could kind of do this, right? Also, I think maybe you leverage your university's alumni network. There's no harm in sending an email to people, somebody who you've never met, but let's say if you can find common ground, if you can see that they're from the same school as you are, or if you know somebody who in your network who's directly connected to you and to them, maybe you can ask them to introduce you, right? But you need to do that research. You need to find that person. Okay, I hope that answers your question, right? For MS, again, if you're doing an MS someplace, if you're working at NUST, again, professors do have research funding at other universities as well, and at NUST, maybe they can give you some sort of assistantship. If you're applying for MS, if you just want to do an MS and want to do it using a scholarship, first of all, it's going to be harder because these programs are more competitive, right? Your best bet would be then to apply for something like a scholarship program like Fulbright, maybe Erasmus Mundus. That's a very successful program that has been inducting a lot of students from Pakistan. So look up the Erasmus Mundus program. So I'm going to write that down there. Erasmus Mundus, they have a lot of programs, again, in different areas. You can maybe apply for those. I've had at least 2 or 3 students who've gone on to do masters using Erasmus Mundus. So, go for scholarships programs, right? In that case, again, might not be very useful to approach professors directly because professors generally don't have funding for masters, right? Especially for international students. If it's local students, for students who's already there, then it's easier to hire them. But for international students, generally difficult to find research funding that allows you to fund master students. Okay, but again, different universities do run master's programs. They do offer scholarships. Even at Aston, our MSc program, I know I came across a Pakistani student who's doing an MSc here, who used to work at Turkey, and he had a fairly decent research profile. And I think when he applied to Aston gave him a 100% tuition fee waiver. So he's getting 100% scholarship, right? Is PhD a full-time thing? Yeah, I would think so. Yes, generally, yeah. In the STEM fields, yes. But again, it depends, right? It really depends. In some areas, I think you can do a part-time PhD as well. And think, so let me, I know people, I have at least one friend who did his master's with me at Michigan State, and then he went into the industry in the US and then moved to Pakistan and is working now for a Pakistani US-based company that has offices in Pakistan. And I know that he did his PhD part-time online from a university in the US, right? I think it was probably Georgia Tech or some other university, but it was done completely online. But again, I'm not sure how easy or difficult that would be to do. I would assume it would be, with a full-time job, it'd be something that would be challenging. But again, it's doable. People are doing it, right? How easy is it to shift from academia to industry? Well, people make that transition. I haven't made that transition. I made the transition from the other side, but that was fairly early on in my career. But people make that transition. It really depends on how flexible you are. But yeah, a lot of people, if you're young, if you've just done your PhD, it's generally very easy to kind of, after a graduate degree, go into the industry. A lot of people in the US do that. I know a lot of students in the UK do that too. It really depends. So it's not very hard to make that transition. But, let's suppose you've spent maybe the last 15 years in academia, last 20 years in academia, you want to move to the industry. I've seen people do it. Obviously, it's not going to be easy, but these things vary from person to person. Okay, received multiple rejections. The application is not a strong one compared to other participants. Well, you can always keep trying. And then are you applying to the right places? And then maybe talk to your, thesis advisor or your research mentor, who can kind of give you some tips on how to improve that. But yeah, as long as you keep trying, I think eventually you do kind of end up finding a position, right? Okay, so applying to MS PhD programs in the fall, I've got a CGPA. So Ali Farouk, do you have any advice for contacting professors? Yeah, ideally you would want to try to reach out to professors through your FIP supervisor or somebody you know at your school, right? Because then it gets easier. So I've had some students got accepted to some programs in the US that didn't have any publications. But that was because they were connected to that professor. So some professor reached out to me. They said, I have PhD students. I have PhD student positions. I'm looking for students. Can you recommend a few people? I obviously recommended a few people. They were very intensive in terms of their recruitment and interview process. But they hired one student initially, and then another student they were able to recommend to another professor at the same university. So it does happen, but generally, again, that's why I'm saying that's where your network is important. That's where your network can help you, right? Without that, it can be a little difficult. But again, if you're going to do that, maybe look for professors who have a track record. So if you look at their labs, can you see students who are from Pakistan, see students who are from the same school? And if that's the case, maybe you can approach them through their students, or at least at the minimum that they kind of have a track record of hiring people from us, right? I can guarantee that if you've seen a professor who has received students in his lab from your university and those students have successfully graduated, they'd be more than happy to hire you, right? Because they know once professors actually get students from Pakistan, in most cases, I know students are really good. Some cases people have bad experiences too. But once those students actually go and show how good our students actually are, I think people generally do become more open to hiring people from Pakistan, right? Or from international universities. But if they don't know, then obviously it's a little tricky. Happy to reach out to people. Reach out to me via LinkedIn. It's probably easier. I get a lot of emails, and I get a little bit of. I have a little bit of problem staying on top of things on my email. But yes, you're happy to reply if you reach out to me via email. Happy to connect with people on LinkedIn as well. Okay. Currently looking for people. I'm currently arranging funding, so I'm in the process of applying for funding, and once I do get funding, I can share it with people. But yes, I've only been here for about 9-10 months, so I still have some grants that are in the pipeline. But yeah, maybe a few months down the line. But probably follow me on LinkedIn. You could also follow AI Lounge as well, but follow us on LinkedIn, and whenever I do have positions, I will share them. In fact, a lot of times what I do is, even if I don't have positions myself, some of my colleagues at other universities have positions. I do generally share those to my LinkedIn. So if you follow me there, you will probably, even if I don't have positions in my own group, I do keep sharing positions at other places from time to time. Okay. Yes, we will share the recording. We'll hopefully upload this to YouTube. Do follow AI Lounge. Again, that's something I'm kind of, I'd like people to follow us. And again, if people feel that it's a good idea, we might even short. I've been thinking of starting our own blog on our website. In fact, we already do have a blog. It's just that we haven't been adding articles to them. But maybe this is something that we could do, right? I feel this is something that'd be very useful for students, and I'd like to kind of share those ideas. Maybe share this in writing as well. So we'll upload the video to YouTube, maybe on other socials as well. So yeah, you can view the recording. We might have to edit some parts out, but yeah, definitely the recording will be there. Thank you. Glad that you find it interesting. Students awaiting intermediate results with Germany. Should I apply for funding for a bachelor's degree? Again, so that's Hadi. I think Hadi, look at some of the students again at that level. I don't really have a lot of experience of getting students to apply, but students do get scholarships. Maybe look at some students from your school or from your college who've gone on to these destinations and see what sort of path they took, right? But yeah, you can apply. Funding in those cases obviously is very competitive because there's a lot of applicants, but it's not impossible to get, right? But you need to have a very outstanding profile in order to get a scholarship, okay? Community work help in application to scholarship? Definitely does. It kind of shows your leadership skills. It kind of shows that you're passionate about what you're doing and you want to make a difference in the world. And yeah, for sure. Okay. Okay, I'm not really too familiar with Norway and stuff. Again, probably look at places in other universities. Yeah, but if you're getting visa problems, again, UK, I feel, is a good destination from the visa perspective. First of all, so if you're looking at different destinations, and this is something that I unfortunately didn't get a lot of time to talk about during the talk, but one important decision is which country do you want to move to, right? If you're thinking about immigrating, do you want to move to the US? Do you want to move to the UK? Do you want to move to Germany? All these destinations, or Canada or Australia, all of these destinations, they have, their pros and cons. And ideally, you want to move to a place that kind of aligns well with where you want to go, right? What your career aims are. But then again, don't look at just your career aims, what your personal goals are as well, right? Would you feel that you would fit well within the UK, within Germany, or the US, right? The UK has the advantage that there are, obviously a lot of Pakistani professionals here. Again, because we come from a Commonwealth country, so a lot of our students do speak English, so the language is not a problem. You don't have a very hard time adjusting here. But then again, applying to grad school here is slightly different. It's a slightly different mindset, but obviously there are positions here as well. And again, as somebody who's in the UK, I want Pakistani students, I want students from NUST and from other universities to come to the UK. That's one of the reasons I am kind of holding this seminar. And I will keep trying to share those opportunities on my LinkedIn. We'll try to share these opportunities on AI Lounge as well, maybe on our blog. So keep following us. Maybe, we'll probably share that information, probably more tips, maybe opportunities that are available that you can apply for. So yes, but again, you have to decide which country you want to move to, right? So as someone like myself, again, I did my master's from the UK, I did my PhD from the US, worked in Pakistan, worked in Saudi Arabia, and now have immigrated back to the UK, right? So for me, UK, for professional reasons and for personal reasons as well, for family reasons as well, made a lot of sense for me compared to other destinations. It may not be the case for all of you, but for some of you, it actually might be the same case. And let's say you have family here, you want to move here. UK is a good destination, and I think visa-wise also good for international students. Okay, as compared to maybe in Germany, I know in Germany sometimes getting the visa can be a little bit difficult. Okay, what should we talk about the first time contacting a professor? Probably talk about their research. Again, maybe something that I probably want to write a blog on. So this gives me a good idea to do that. So Eamon, you might want to note that down. This would make a good blog article. So if you're reaching out to a professor, what do you highlight? What do you say? But ideally, talk about what research you've been doing. Talk about their research, right? Maybe title it your research on something like this. But again, if you don't get a reply, maybe there's no problem sending a second email. If you still don't get a reply, might be better to reach out to one of their PhD students or their postdocs who actually have a little bit more time, who can give you more advice. If you're trying to reach out to a professor who doesn't have any funding, there's no point in kind of keeping that conversation going, right? You want to kind of reach out to people who have positions available or have positions that are upcoming, right? So yeah, so it takes a little bit of leveraging your network and stuff, but maybe I'll write about this. Okay. But if we want PhD in another area of AI instead of the one we did our master's thesis in, there's no problem. You can always do that. Thank you. Glad you liked the webinar. Okay, my LinkedIn, if you do a quick Google search, you should be able to find me. But let me see if I can kind of share that. If you just went and Googled Hassan Akhil Khan, and let me see if I can share that profile with you guys quickly. But you should, as long as you Google my name, you should be able to find me, and now you know what I look like. So you should be able to reach out. You should be able to find me. I don't think finding me on LinkedIn should be difficult, but we can share that in a follow-up email as well. I think we have everybody's email, so we can share that information there. All right, thank you. Eamon has already done that, so great. We're on top of that. I think we're at the end of the questions. So yeah, so anybody has any other questions or want to stick around for maybe another 5 minutes or so, happy to answer their questions. Feel free to unmute your mic and talk if you want. But yeah, you don't have to stick around now. So I think that pretty much covers it. Thank you so much, everybody, for showing up. I think we had a fairly decent turnout. Yeah, so we might send you a follow-up email with a short survey just for our own analysis. We'd appreciate if you could kind of answer that as well. So the purpose would be so we can continue to offer maybe webinars like this and maybe make them better in the future as well. So yeah, so if you have time, maybe fill out that follow-up survey that might be coming to you from AI Lounge via email. Okay. Should I not apply? No, there's no harm in applying. You should always apply. Wherever you're thinking, you should always apply. Doesn't matter. What's the worst thing that can happen? They can say no, right? So that's all. That doesn't matter. There's no. So there's never, never, never underestimate your ability. Never, 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 think that as you don't stand a chance. No, go ahead and apply. And if you get a rejection, you get a rejection. That's fine. If you get a rejection, maybe look at why you got a rejection. I get rejections. I applied for jobs. I got rejected. It happens very frequently. So don't let rejection scare you. Okay. So yeah, big deal. So worst thing that can happen is you won't get it. So what? You can apply. You can apply the next time. You can apply to some other place. Okay. All right. How early should we start within our research when we want to enroll in a PhD? Again, I've said that at the start. Maybe you can watch the recording. So this is MRAM. Maybe watch the recording, but I've given probably take like a 2-year, start 2 years ahead. Again, it depends on how much time you have. That timeline is designed more from the perspective of undergraduate students who are doing like a full-time degree simultaneously. But let's say you have free time, you're not doing anything else, you're just doing research, then at least a year. So you have some sort of work to show or support your application. Okay. All right. So I think that's it. We're gonna stop now. So I guess, Eamon, if you could kindly stop recording. I'll just stop recording myself.